A fallacy. Can you tell me what a fallacy is?
Let's turn to Father Ananias. He hasn't had a chance to speak in a while, so let's give him a chance.
All right. What if I do some magic for you? What is philosophy but sorcery with words? Huh? Okay. Let me address another.
I literally thought you were going to do a magic. I thought you were going to do a magic trick, and I was all excited.
I appreciate actually the argument, Trent, that you made, and I'd like to just get your thoughts. I'll give a little pushback on this, and I talked to Garby about this too, because sometimes when you get a thought, you don't know. I'm like, is this crazy? Am I just, or is there something here? Mm-hmm. But I did actually find that you kind of had a clever argument about if Muslims and Christians are not referring to the same thing, then there's no disagreement. There is a disagreement, therefore they must be referring to something. And I think Jay kind of hit on this earlier, but there's a way in which that obviously we're saying conceptually, we're having a disagreement about who and what God is. And so what I think would be a helpful distinction, do you remember Tarski's object and meta-language? Which really was introduced to kind of resolve these kind of seeming paradoxes, like liar paradoxes. The following sentence is true, so it's true, and it's false, and stuff like that. And so I thought this was interesting. Would you agree that we obviously, maybe it's not even the Muslims, maybe I'm talking with a pagan Norse, since we brought that up, since my parents give me a pagan Norse name. We're talking about Odin or something like that, and we're generally having a disagreement. It's like, well, no, he's the highest being, blah, 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 and all this stuff. I see a parallel with kind of object language. We're really having a disagreement about the language and what it refers. That's a very different question at the object language. Is it actually hitting the referent? Wouldn't you think that's a helpful distinction?
It could be. It could be. I'd have to, see how that is developed further, but it's certainly not irrelevant. I mean, it's a relevant and worthy consideration. I just think that there's the sorts of paradoxes of reference that we're talking about with God, and the opacity sorts of situations are just enough different than the maybe more hardcore semantic paradoxes that Tarski was interested in, that I wouldn't be sure that it was relevant without sort of seeing it developed into a series of
I'm not saying maps on, but there's
analogies.
Something like that going on. That we want to say that, well, in a way, we are having a disagreement, even, and it's possible we're not, at the object language, not actually referring to the same thing, but we are having a conversation at the level of language and religion and what all that's doing. And that was my point, is to see that there was a parallel.
Yeah. I think that's a worthy research project and consideration.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, I hand it over to you. But I want to hear what Christopher has to say.
And then we can wrap up. And Christopher, you're still muted.
He doesn't have anything. He's muted.
Sorry. There we go. Okay. So, Father Ananias, I actually had taken a look at the Garby paper, Theistic Fallacies. That's the one to which you're referring, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I saw him make a lot of the same points you've made tonight about referential opacity and about rigid designation and the difference between descriptions and names, so forth and so on. What I guess I'm still missing, though, is what the key difference is supposed to be between the natural examples that we've raised and the God case, because, as I pointed out, we have examples where, we get reference even though the term is not a rigid designator, where we get reference even though the term is not a name. so on and so forth. So I'm still puzzled about what is supposed to break down in the divine case when I'm using the term God. What is breaking down where reference suddenly becomes much harder? Or if not reference, because I know Jay is very worried about the difference between reference and the intentional attitude of worship or adoration.
Well,
That's
that's why I
fine.
let him deal with that. I just focused on what you guys are talking about.
Real quick, let's get Father Ananias to respond, and then let's just wrap up. Let's go ahead and wrap the show up.
So if you look, would you agree that games like solitaire, Roman law, or something like that is significantly different than the things that we were just talking about with natural objects? Because we have to see there's an essential difference there. If we don't, then obviously that's what the problem is.
So I think there's a very significant difference there in terms of, you're referring to, human mental constructs, right? Games and systems of laws are not, natural objects. They are constructions of the human mind, or maybe in some cases the divine mind. But I don't see how that makes referring to them any more difficult, right? So let me give you an example. Let's talk about solitaire, since you brought that up. Suppose my 3-4 year old niece is talking to me about solitaire. She's seen me playing solitaire, and she really is interested in it, and she's referring to solitaire this, solitaire that, but she's getting like all the rules wrong. She has no idea what cards can go on top of other cards, etc., etc. But if I ask her what is solitaire, and she says to me, well, it's that game you were playing, Uncle Christopher. That's enough. She's referring to solitaire, even though she's dramatically wrong about the rules.
But that's what I'm arguing is not the actual case with Muslims. So I'm not saying that you can't have some sort of disagreement, or get things wrong, which is exactly why I thought that Trent's point was really good. And I said, yes, they still are referring to. So that's sufficient enough to actually determine the referent in a case like that, right? So but the point that Gerby is making, though, is that, again, this isn't going to work for Islam, right? Because
Why?
you have to see, because the essential, it's still determined, right? The rules, again, by the rules, right? So the fact that if they're actually pointing at Jesus, right, and we're having a conversation about is he the second person of the Trinity? That would be the analogy that would follow. But we're not. We're doing it within the total system of all the rules and the conjunction, specifically them denying it. So I don't think that analogy, where if Christ was here, right, and you had this, and they were having a conversation specifically like that, which you were talking about the solitaire, I'd say, yeah, like they're talking about the same thing, they're just wrong about that. But that doesn't.
Just to clarify my analogy, in my analogy where I'm having this conversation with my niece, I'm not currently playing solitaire. The game is not present. She is not, as we say in philosophy of language, fixing her reference by ostension. She is using words. She's saying it's the game I saw you playing earlier, Uncle Christopher, etc., etc.
She saw you playing the game. That's my point.
Well, okay, so the issue here is just some kind of causal connection, right?
Well, there's an empirical connection there, like it was present before her so that it fixed the referent. Muslims,
so
that's not the case with Muslims.
Why can't Muslims fix the reference of their worship by saying, well, I worship the omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent creator of all the world, ex nihilo, and if you want to like talk about fixing it in terms of a causal connection, you say the being who created all this around me, and
Okay, so where in the analogy is the empirical entity that they encountered? because that was what worked in your. I saw you empirically playing the game, right? So that's what I would ask.
Yeah.
In what instance?
I mean, what Christians have had empirical encounters with God? Like no, almost no man has seen God, right? So and lived. Let's set the maybe example of St. Paul aside, right? I mean, none of
Well, the
us.
Eucharist. I mean, you
Gen-
believe the Eucharist, right?
that's
So
not
if
an
they came
empirical
in and
encounter
saw
with
I
God.
saw you partaking of the Eucharist, and of course it's God. You believe that's God.
It's not an empirical encounter with God. I do
Wait,
not
what?
see. Yeah, yeah. I mean, what I
Well, I'm
see
not
and
saying you
hear
see his
taking.
essence, but like he's really there
No, what
empirically.
I
It's fine.
see, what I see, yes, that's true. He's really there. That's absolutely correct. Substantially there, really there. But I do not see him. I do not taste him. I do not have any kind of empirical sense encounter with God in the Eucharist.
Well, there we disagree with. And that's going to get into the essence energies distinction. And we don't have to
Really?
get
Oh,
into
wait,
that
okay.
now.
So I'm curious about this. So you do think that that what you taste when you consume the host is God? You
No,
taste
I
God?
don't. No, I would use the analogy. I said you're experiencing God empirically, right? So it's not that he's just present there and I have a direct immediate contact, right? The same way, and you would agree with this with iconography, right? Why is it when we venerate icons, we're not engaged in worship? We could say that. I mean, I don't know what you would say on this. I know what Orthodox would say is that God is really in the ink and the wood and stuff without being the wood and stuff. So when I'm touching and tasting, I'm having a direct, immediate experience through the empirical. Although it seems wrong to say, am I actually seeing God? Well, think about this. The incarnation's a perfect example. What are you seeing when you see, if we were on the road to Emmaus or Damascus, as he pointed out, are we seeing God? Because you use the sensible. Well, yes, you're not. The essences of God is actually present there, correct? You couldn't say, well, no, you're not, or something like that. And
Well,
so what's
I'm not clear on what you mean by empirical then, because if you talk about having an empirical experience of God, I take that to mean you're having some kind of sense data of God. You're seeing him, hearing him, touching him, tasting him. And I'm happy to agree that the apostles had experiences like that of God in the person of Christ. Obviously, the situation for us is much different. And so I've never seen or heard or touched or tasted God. I've touched and seen and tasted the Eucharistic accidents, which
yeah, we
appear
don't.
where God is substantially present, but I don't know what you mean by empirical.
Well, we're not going to agree with obviously the Thomistic kind of definitions of substance accident is the
Uh,
present in. All I'm saying is, and you don't have to know exactly, other than is he actually there empirically?
are you telling me I have to have an Eastern Orthodox theology of the Eucharist to worship the same God as you?
You might, you might, yeah.
Really?
Well,
Really?
yeah. Like I
Okay.
said,
Mm. See that?
I
See, that's
take
what I
the
was worried
Gary.
about. That's what I was worried about in my prior line of questioning was
Well, I'm
trying to
not for this
determine
debate
like
willing to say
where
that
these
that's a more.
lines go.
Yeah, that's a more what Gary said, a more fuzzy area. That's why I said, well, let's just go with um suppose we weren't talking about Islam. Let's go to clearer examples of like Odin or something like that. Um are they referring to? So again, I just said might. It's a bit fuzzy on that. But again, I know that that's the analogy there, that God is really there. Now, how to say, well, exactly what way and how and stuff like that. All that was needed for the analogy is, for the game, is the child, there was something there, right? It wasn't simply just a mental construct of rules. That's all that's necessary to make. So it's kind of a red herring to go into the details, well, exactly how and stuff like that. That's all that's necessary to draw the kind of the analogies between the two. Now, can we get into areas where I'm like, I don't know, really, like maybe? Of course you're going to admit that. We get in any areas where it's like, I don't actually know where the delineation of where it's like you're no longer right, the exact delineation. But all of you can certainly make an acknowledgement. Well, that definitely isn't, and this definitely is. That's my point.
Yeah. So
I think Christopher, I think we should start to wrap things up. I think the main thing here is that I don't want it to be like a 2v1 situation.
Is it possible, Trent, that you gave examples in which we would agree that you're getting stuff wrong or something like that? What was the one you're in the room and we're talking about Christopher? Is it possible that two people, one could overhear a conversation thinking it's Christopher and it's not? Almost an exact similar example, right? That you were given, where somebody's like, "Oh, well, yeah, I know that Christopher. By the way, Christopher's my brother, and he just happens to have all this stuff." Is that possible in that scenario, or any scenario?
There might be scenarios where that's possible, which is why I was encouraging you to look at the semantic drift. In the typical case, the typical philosopher of language is going to say that even if you think you're talking about a different Christopher, and you walk into a room and they say they're talking about Christopher, and you say, of thinking of in your mind, you're thinking of a different Christopher, you might say, yeah, he's a real, whatever. You've just attributed that to that guy because that guy was the one who was
Because
the
he's there
subject
in
of
the
the
room.
conversation.
Yes, thank you. I would agree with that. Thank you. That's my closing argument.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Shoot.
Okay.
Father Ananias, did you want to make a closing statement, or were you happy with where we left off?
I mean, I like the closing statement. Like, if I could get you to that position, and again, with Christopher, maybe a little correction. It was presented exactly what the essential difference between it would be. You just disagree. Is that correct? That's actually would make the difference. So the argument was presented, right? The argument was presented, is what I'm saying.
I never heard anything. I never heard anything beyond God is not a name and God is not a rigid designator. But we have cases which don't involve names or rigid designators where reference and intentional attitudes are still easy.
So when I'm saying those make it difficult, it's not impossible. That's why I added. But then there's a special character just beyond that. So those are just difficulties. They're not insurmountable difficulties because we have empirical cases in which that's possible. So that's why I stressed and rejected the analogy, is that no, it's going to be a lot more actually like the games in which you have no, like, there's no Christopher in the room, there's no game. Now, you may disagree with that, but you realize that's the argument, right?
Well, I gave a counterexample using a natural counterexample to that as well, where reference still succeeds even though there's no natural object in the room.
But there was in front of the person, is what I'm saying, and that's why I'm saying that analogy doesn't hold.
That's why I was waving my.
You could make the game a purely mental game, right? So, like, you and I could play a game of chess in our heads, right? I just tell you, king to e8 or whatever, right? And you tell me what your move is and everything. And there's no empirical object whatsoever. And yet we can still have very easy reference to and intentional attitudes towards that game.
And so what in your context would change it? then? So what if somebody starts coming in with a whole bunch of rules? Well, the example was, what was it? Solitaire, and what was the other game? In the I don't know, chess, right? I mean, clearly, and that's why it's important. There's nothing to a Toto T to kind of point at that would fix that, as you'd put it out in your other examples. So the child starts describing chess when you're describing solitaire. Obviously, you're not referring to the same thing, and it's specifically because it's not operating. It's not mind independent that way. It's the whole kind of rules and sets. So you really changed the game that you're talking about. Oh, you're talking about
like,
chess. No, I'm talking about solitaire.
No, suppose you and I played a game of mental chess right now, right? We just take the we take the next half hour to play a game of mental chess, right? And now let's suppose we come back to it 2 weeks later, right? And you say, or I say to you, Father, do you remember that game of mental chess we played at 3:49 a.m. British time on the 28th of June? And you say, well, sure I do. I remember how I checkmated you in 2 moves. And I say, what? No, that's totally not how it happened. I checkmated you after 5 moves.
I agree.
We could have massive disagreements about it, right? But we're still succeeding in referring.
That's why I think the Tarski distinction is important. And I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna follow up. There's a way that we can talk about it without not actually hitting the thing. It's like, well, now we're talking about something different, even though conceptually we're referring back. And that's what we get when we start talking about mental objects. It's your level of kind of meta language. So I said, like, in a way, yes, but in a way, no. And I thought you guys agreed to that. There's a way that you can see what I mean right now.
We're way beyond closing statements, so I'm going to close. I'm going to give a benediction on all of this. Okay, what we've done is which is the best success you can get out of philosophical discussions is we now know what the. That's right. We now know what the core issue is. Now we're not. It's way too late in the day to solve the game, but at least now we know. I think Christopher and I understand where the tip of the spear of Father Ananias' argument is. Okay.
Good, thank you.
And so that's the most that we could ever hope to get out of this kind of debate. That is a win. And so maybe we come back and take that up, develop that. I don't know, but that's still substantive progress, and I think we should.
Thank you, guys. Thank you both.
So that I can go watch a movie. Thank you,
Father Ananias, for joining us. This was a great time.